One thing that microlensing is really good at is finding planets that are a long way from their stars or even not orbiting a star at all, what we call rogue planets.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I've always wondered is we've been hearing a lot in the last decade or so about the definition of the word planet. And in order to exclude Pluto, the definition of planet has to include things like clearing out its orbit, being the most massive thing in its orbit around the star. How do planets that are not orbiting a star fit into that definition?
That is a great question. That is not dumb at all. And many people, including many astronomers, I think are kind of wondering that. Um, there's a kind of classical definition now that rests on how massive is an object. If it's under about 13 times the mass of Jupiter, we say it's a planet. And if it's more than about 13 times the mass of Jupiter, we say it's a brown dwarf, which is a failed star, which is a very low mass star. And this 13 Jupiter masses happens to correspond to an astrophysical model that says this is the threshold at which you start undergoing fusion.
What's your definition of a planet? What do you use or think of when you say the word planet in a paper, for example?
Yeah, I this might make me an unusual traditionalist, but I do use this mass criterion, this threshold of, something that's astrophysically intrinsic to the object. Is it undergoing fusion or not? And again, 13 is very squishy. It can depend on some environmental characteristics. I don't actually think it should depend on how it formed necessarily in relation to other objects. I prefer something that's more inherent to the entity itself.
So, one complication on that criterion. I've put on a bit of weight since I moved to Australia, but I'm not undergoing fusion as far as I know. Am I a planet?
Well, it depends on if you've put on 13 Jupiter masses worth of weight. So I think you're safe. I think you're not a planet.
So, where is that lower threshold?
Oh, that's a good question. So this is related to the Pluto controversy, which is very dear to my heart, I should say. I grew up in Kansas, and Clyde Tombaugh, the guy who discovered Pluto, is from Kansas, and he's the only non-Western European to have discovered a planet in the solar system. And then, of course, it was taken away from him, or from us, as I like to think. So one
It
of
wasn't taken away
the
from
kind of
anyone. It
criteria.
still exists. It's still a
Well,
perfectly valid astrophysical body. Whether we give it the name planet, sorry, I feel strongly about this.
Yeah, Dwarf Planet just doesn't have the same chutzpah, I think. I haven't. I just there's too much history for me. I haven't gotten the quite same ring from it but it was a lot of the controversy came from on the smaller side. So we've talked a little bit about the upper kind of definition of a planet, and then on the smaller side, so you mentioned planets literally definitionally now, need to be the most massive object in their orbit and kind of cleared out or accreted, basically eaten all of the other things in their orbit. Another definition that factors in that maybe doesn't get as much press is, I think this is the technical term, is sphericization. So basically, if you go outside and set a rock down on the ground and spin it, no matter how hard you spin it with your hand, it's not going to turn into a sphere, like a tennis ball, round shape or anything like that. But planets in the solar system, as they rotate, the first law in space is no one can hear you scream. The second law is everything's spinning. So all of the planets in the solar system are spinning, and they're all basically spherical, the shape of a ball. And asteroids are a good example of something that, it's massive and it's out there floating in space and it's orbiting our sun, and it formed in the solar system, but they're not spherical. They're kind of like just big rocks. They still have crags and holes and all this kind of stuff going on their surfaces. And the threshold was set that Pluto was not close enough to a perfect sphere to kind of be above this threshold for the planet definition. It wasn't massive enough that as it was rotating, it actually sphericized itself. I don't know exactly to what mass that corresponds, but that was one of the other big things that, as much as it pains my heart, Pluto just didn't make the cut. That's why it's dwarfed. It's tiny. It didn't have enough mass to.
Who are we to decide that dwarf is a lower status than regular planet? Maybe it's perfectly happy being a dwarf planet. Sometimes little things are nice.
Yeah, and it's probably easier to play hide and seek if you're a dwarf planet. Like, Jupiter doesn't have that luxury. Brown dwarfs don't have that luxury.
I just don't want to have to memorize all these new dwarf planet names. So if we can stick to 8 planets, I can remember that. But the, dozens to hundreds of dwarf planets that people will find in the next few years, I can't come up with a mnemonic that long. So.
Well, and I remember when I was learning mnemonics in school for the planets, one of the ones that I had learned was for learning them in order from the sun up to Pluto was my very excellent mother just served us 9 pizzas going from Mercury to Pluto. I'm like, I like pizza. I love my mom. Like, that sounds great. And then there was, the keep Pluto as a planet. The whole sociological community was like, well, what do you do with the mnemonic? Think of the mnemonic. What does it mean for children? Nothing. It means nothing. My very excellent mother just served us nothing.
Ouch, that's rough. My mom serves nachos. I like that. That's solid. That always works for me.
I like nachos. I'd heard noodles, which I didn't like as much as a kid. If I'd heard nachos at a younger age, I think I would have been on board with it.
The one I learned was many vampires eat meat just so you never ponder.
What the fuck?
I don't know if the excellent mother is an American thing.
Is it so that we never ponder
whether they eat meat? I guess I don't know. I never questioned it. I was like 6.
I thought vampires just drink blood. Where's the meat part come from?
Do you know? Have you interviewed every vampire about their dietary preferences? Maybe some of them like a steak.
So they're all sparkly, and they live in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S.
That's actually true, by the way. That's funny. I have never heard that one. I've heard a lot of strange ones that I unfortunately can't remember, but I've never heard that one.
I don't know if it's common or if it's a thing that my teacher made up, but I grew up thinking that was the thing that everyone learned.
Cool.
Was there a moment where you busted it out at a cocktail party and everyone was like, what happened to pizzas and the nachos? What did you do with mom and where are these vampires?
The vampires are way more exciting. You wouldn't want to eat my mother's cooking, so.
Yeah, well, I guess do we have more? I should know this. Don't tell my PhD advisor. Are there more dwarf planets now than there are planets? We could get ourselves into kind of a knot if future astronomers lower that threshold.
It's got to be close.
I thought maybe 8 and 13.
There's Pluto, Eris, Sedna, Haumea, Makemake, and Ceres, if you consider Ceres. I guess not, it didn't clear its orbit, but I mean, that's like 6 that I could just rattle off that have names that I know of. And I don't know this stuff, so it's close, if not already past. I don't know. I'll tweet at Mike Brown later and see what he says.
So this was fun. We should do controversial topics more often.
We should. I had no idea that vampires and nachos would be so controversial.
Cheers.
See you.